ADHD brains that refuse to start important projects but hyperfocus for 6 hours on reorganizing music libraries at 2 a.m. reveal something crucial about how motivation actually works. The gap between what these brains can do and what they're expected to do isn't inconsistent willpower. It's a perfectly consistent system running on completely different neurochemical fuel than most people assume. Hey there, neurospicy folks! I'm Dr. Monty, and I'm an ADHD psychologist with a special interest in all things neurodivergent neuroscience. If you enjoy my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel to help me grow and bring more scientific understanding and awareness to a larger audience. Thanks so much! The conventional model of motivation treats it like a gas tank. You either have motivation or you don't. When it's full, you can tackle anything. When it's empty, you can't get started on simple tasks. The solution involves filling the tank through discipline, better planning, or force of will. This model feels intuitive because it matches how motivation appears from the outside. Someone sits down, opens their laptop, and starts working on their tax return. They must have had motivation. Someone else stares at the same tax software for 45 minutes without clicking a single button. They must lack motivation. The difference seems obvious. But this gas tank model creates a devastating trap for ADHD brains. When you can't start something important, you conclude you're lazy, undisciplined, or fundamentally flawed. When you can hyperfocus effortlessly on something that interests you, you think you could do it for everything if you really wanted to. The inconsistency becomes evidence of insufficient effort. The seductive power of this model is that it promises control. If motivation is willpower, then more willpower will fix it. If it's planning, then better planning will solve it. If it's discipline, then greater discipline will unlock everything. The model suggests that the right technique or mindset will make any task possible. Dr. Russell Barkley's 2015 research in Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, a Handbook for Diagnosis and Treatment, identified a key distinction that explains this puzzle. Neurotypical brains can generate activation energy from importance alone. The report affects your performance review, so you work on the report. The dishes need washing, so you wash the dishes. The assignment is due Friday, so you start the assignment. Importance creates enough neurochemical momentum to initiate and sustain action. ADHD brains don't work this way, and 2 decades of neuroimaging research have mapped exactly why. Think of motivation not as fuel in a tank, but as a lock with multiple tumblers that all need to align before the mechanism opens. For neurotypical brains, importance alone can align enough tumblers to turn the lock. For ADHD brains, importance is just one tumbler among several, and it's often insufficient by itself. The mechanism involves reward circuits connecting your prefrontal cortex to structures like the nucleus accumbens. Barkley's extensive research describes how ADHD brains show differences in reward processing systems. Your brain constantly calculates whether an action is worth the effort based on expected reward minus expected cost. In ADHD brains, this calculation runs differently. Volkow and Swanson's 2013 meta-analysis in the Lancet demonstrated that ADHD brains show altered dopamine signaling in reward circuits, affecting how the brain processes motivation and reward prediction. This creates meaningful differences in how tasks feel worth pursuing. The ADHD brain compensates by becoming exquisitely sensitive to certain types of rewards that can override these differences. Research identifies 4 specific conditions that commonly unlock motivation in ADHD brains. The first condition is novelty. When something is genuinely new or unfamiliar, it triggers neurochemical release that can power through executive function deficits. This explains why you might spend 3 hours researching a random Wikipedia topic, but can't start reading a familiar work document. The brain isn't being defiant, it's responding to a neurochemical signal indicating worthiness of investigation. The second condition is urgency. Real deadlines, not artificial ones, create a stress response that floods the prefrontal cortex with norepinephrine. This explains why many people with ADHD become masters of last-minute productivity. Approaching deadlines don't just create pressure, they create the neurochemical conditions necessary for sustained attention. Mowbray et al.'s 2019 study in Journal of Attention Disorders found that people with ADHD often perform better under time pressure, not because they're adrenaline seekers, but because urgency provides the activation energy their brains require. The third condition is challenge or competition. When a task involves mastery, problem solving, or competing against a standard, it engages what researchers call the intrinsic motivation system. Research building on Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory suggests that tasks providing autonomy, competence, and relatedness can be particularly engaging for people with ADHD. This explains why you might procrastinate on a routine report, but stay up until 3 a.m. perfecting a presentation that showcases expertise. The fourth condition is personal interest or passion. When something connects to your values, curiosities, or identity, it bypasses the reward prediction calculation entirely. Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow states, confirmed by recent fMRI studies, shows that passionate interest activates multiple reward circuits simultaneously, creating what researchers call abundant attentional resources. This is hyperfocus, not a deficit of attention, but attention so abundant it becomes difficult to redirect. Critically, these aren't preferences or personality quirks, they're neurobiological patterns. When multiple conditions align, ADHD brains can sustain attention and effort that rivals or exceeds neurotypical performance. When none of the conditions align, even simple tasks become neurologically difficult, regardless of their importance. This explains why the same person who can't answer emails can reorganize an entire closet system at midnight, or why someone who struggles with routine paperwork can learn a new programming language in 2 weeks. The brain isn't inconsistent. It's consistently responding to different neurochemical triggers than the ones most productivity advice assumes. But this mechanism creates complications that researchers are still untangling. When a task loses novelty or challenge, motivation doesn't gradually decrease, it vanishes completely. This isn't the gentle fade of neurotypical boredom. It's like someone flipped a switch. Projects get abandoned at 90% completion, not because they're unimportant, but because they've stopped triggering the neurochemical conditions necessary for ADHD brain engagement. The second complication involves emotional regulation, which Barkley argues is actually the core deficit in ADHD, not attention. When tasks trigger negative emotions, boredom, frustration, overwhelm, or shame, the limbic system essentially hijacks the prefrontal cortex. Shaw et al.'s 2014 fMRI studies, published in American Journal of Psychiatry, show that emotional interference disrupts working memory and cognitive control more severely in ADHD brains than neurotypical brains. This creates what researchers call task avoidance spirals. A boring task triggers emotional discomfort. Avoidance provides immediate relief, reinforcing the avoidance behavior. The task accumulates shame and urgency, making it more emotionally loaded, which increases avoidance. The cycle continues until external pressure, a deadline, consequences, or social accountability, creates enough urgency to override the emotional interference. The third complication is that ADHD motivation strategies can become compulsive. Dr. Anna Lemke's 2021 research in Dopamine Nation shows that constantly seeking novelty, challenge, or urgency can dysregulate the reward system further. Some people with ADHD become addicted to crisis mode productivity, deliberately creating urgency because it's the only state where they feel competent. Others become chronic project starters, chasing the neurochemical reward of novelty without developing systems for sustained effort. There's also significant individual variation that complicates any universal approach. Dr. Joel Nigg's longitudinal studies at Oregon Health and Science University, published between 2017 and 2020, have identified at least 3 distinct ADHD subtypes with different motivational profiles. Some people need high stimulation and novelty. Others need structure and predictability. Some respond to social accountability. Others find it paralyzing. The 4-condition model describes the mechanism, but individual brains implement it differently. The replication crisis has also affected ADHD motivation research. Many early studies on reward sensitivity used small samples and didn't control for comorbid conditions like anxiety or depression, which affect motivation independently. More recent meta-analyses suggest the effects are real, but smaller and more variable than initially reported. Finally, there's the question of whether interest-based motivation is entirely neurobiological or partly learned. Some researchers argue that years of struggling with importance-based systems teach ADHD brains to rely more heavily on interest-based triggers. Others point to genetic studies showing that dopamine receptor variants associated with ADHD predict motivational differences even in early childhood. The truth is probably both. Genetic differences create vulnerabilities that environmental experiences then shape. Understanding that your brain runs on context-dependent motivation rather than general willpower changes how you approach everything from daily tasks to major life decisions. Stop trying to fix your motivation and start designing for it. Instead of asking, "How do I get motivated to do this?" ask, "How do I make this task hit one of my brain's activation triggers?" Can you add novelty by changing your environment or approach? Can you create authentic urgency through accountability or deadlines? Can you find the challenge or learning opportunity hidden in routine work? Can you connect the task to something you genuinely care about? Recognize that your productivity will always be uneven, and that's not a flaw. It's how your brain works. ADHD brains are designed for what researchers call variable interval performance. You'll have periods of intense focus and periods of scattered attention. Instead of fighting this pattern, design your life around it. Save routine tasks for high-energy periods. Use low-energy periods for planning, organizing, or activities that don't require sustained focus. Develop what some clinicians call motivation scaffolding, external structures that provide the neurochemical triggers your brain needs. This might mean body doubling, where you work alongside someone else to create social activation. It might mean gamification, turning routine tasks into challenges with clear progress markers. It might mean environmental design, creating spaces that signal different types of work to your brain. Practice emotional regulation as a motivation strategy. When you notice task avoidance, pause and identify the emotion underneath. Boredom, overwhelm, and perfectionism all require different interventions. Boredom might need novelty or challenge. Overwhelm might need task breakdown or environmental simplification. Perfectionism might need permission to do good enough work. Finally, reframe your relationship with importance-based tasks. You're not broken because you can't generate motivation from should alone. You're working with a brain that requires different fuel. The goal isn't to become someone who can do boring things through pure willpower. It's to become someone who can reliably create the conditions where your brain engages naturally. This might mean negotiating with supervisors to build challenge into routine work. It might mean partnering with people whose brains complement yours. It might mean choosing careers, relationships, and lifestyles that align with how your motivation actually works, rather than how you think it should work. ADHD brains aren't motivationally broken. They're motivationally specific. Where neurotypical brains can run on importance alone, ADHD brains need novelty, urgency, challenge, or genuine interest to generate the neurochemical conditions for sustained attention. This isn't a limitation to overcome, but a design to understand and work with. The same brain that can't start a boring task can hyperfocus for hours on something fascinating. The same brain that struggles with routine can innovate under pressure. The motivation isn't missing, it's waiting for the right context to unlock it.